All right, everyone. We are going to get started. We're a couple minutes after the hour and want to be respectful of all your times. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. To reiterate, my name is Tyler Wyngarden. I'm with Technology Association of Iowa. We believe that every month when October comes around, and nationally we say it is October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. While that is important for sure, we believe here that it is more than just awareness. We want you to take action, learn from the subject leaders around the state, and take away some best practices back into your organization. So throughout the month of October, we are learning from educational partners across Iowa who can give insights, help your company to both mature and advance your cybersecurity structure within your respective organizations. Today, I am really fortunate to have the good people from Okta to talk about turbocharging your security through identity, which I think many of us know is a critical part to your cybersecurity health. We're going to dive into the dynamic world of identity-driven security and explore how it can supercharge your organization's overall security posture. Given the recent news and the ongoing news in the marketplace, I think this is probably a more important topic than ever. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce the good people at Okta, Manoj and Chase Nevins as well, to give our insights. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Manoj, and thank you guys so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, guys. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And I'm going to quickly set the stage even before I start my presentation. Let me know once you can see my screen, and we should be good to go.
Yep, looking good.
Perfect. So today's agenda, what I have in mind is I'm going to start off with what industry trends look like, and then talk a little bit about how Okta is positioned in a way to help cybersecurity and enforce and strengthen the security posture within your organization. And once I finish a couple of slides, I'm also going to jump into my demo platform and try to give you a quick sneak peek of how identity can help you bolster your security posture. And I'll also talk a little bit about automation and least privilege as well while we drive that demonstration. So as we've seen in the industry today, security models are completely evolving over the past few years. Gone are the days where everything's focused on a perimeter-based security. So if you have a lot of resources, users, applications behind a firewall, you're all good. That's not the thought anymore, because people have been moving, and with remote work, users have been using different applications, different devices, and they're also logging in from different locations and not an office location. So in scenarios like that, there's a lot more of uncertainty. And that's where, we have a lot of the cybersecurity incidents that are happening today. So starting with phishing attempts and credential stuffing, account takeovers, these are all the new trends that we see in the industry. And Okta is geared towards, helping eliminate some of these threats and help you bolster up your security posture. And as you can see from the slide, 60% of all the breaches in the past, couple of years have been based on identity and credentials. And as you can also understand, security leaders are asked to do a lot more with less. The first thing that security leaders want to do is mitigate risk and amid this really risky landscape, and eliminate any kind of phishing and brute force attacks, supply chain hacks, or even ransomware attacks, right? And while doing that, they also enable the business to move quickly, so they don't want the constraints of cybersecurity to restrict them from moving at a better pace. And while they wanted to enforce point 1 and point 2 here, they want to do it at a quicker pace, while also establishing security measures to make sure they've eliminated any kind of risks. And one thing to point out here is, from an industry standpoint, at any point of time, the first line of defense is going to be identity. And even when you're trying to access an application, the first point of contact starts with identity, which is becoming the single point for the zero trust journey and zero trust security of the industry today. But on the other side, identity cannot be a silver bullet and cannot make sure everything's going in the right way just by fixing the identity side. So in collaboration with external third-party applications and vendors, Okta is going to help you build a better sense of security and bolster up the cybersecurity posture of your organization. The vision to get there is extremely simple when we take a look at it at the first go. You ideally want to ensure all your users are authenticated and all the devices are secure. And on top of that, you're brokering all the resources necessary for access. So whenever an employee wants to log in from their laptop, personal device, they have access and they're good to go at that point without any additional friction. And granting the right level of access for the right amount of time is also critical in this scenario. And you want to do all of that with the least amount of friction to make sure there's no MFA fatigue or there's no other bad experiences for your employees. However, when you actually look at what you're trying to achieve here, there's a lot of complexity that is built into this specific use case. When you're talking about users, your users can be employees, contractors, partners, privileged users, and all of these individual components have different user experiences that need to be tailor-made for those specific users. And on top of that, introduce remote work, and there's a lot of locations and networks now. And in a similar way, with the changing industry, you've got laptops, smartphones, you also have iPads and tablets. And on top of all of that, some of these devices are managed by the organization and some of these devices are personal as well, which brings in a lot of vulnerability in the cybersecurity space. And along with all these additional constraints that we've seen, we also need to deploy applications and maintain access for different applications like cloud-based apps, on-prem applications, infrastructure. And you need to do all of that by continuously assessing risk and maintaining your employees' lifecycle and partner lifecycle, and also making sure every user gets the right level of license for the right amount of time. And this becomes extremely complex, and that is where Okta comes into play to help you solve this process. If you look at this dashboard, if you look at the screen right here, you can understand that what Okta is doing is putting the user at first. And whenever a user is logging in with a specific device, Okta gets all of that information into context, and it compares it against the risk engine that Okta has. And based on the risk level, it's going to give access to users or even deny access sometimes. So imagine someone is logging in from their home network or office network, which is considered secure. You want to make sure they have access to applications without any additional friction because you kind of trust that resource. However, if that exact employee is traveling on a vacation to Europe and trying to log in at the same time again, you don't trust the network and you need to step them up for authentication. And in a similar way, if there's a bad actor trying to log in with a malicious IP address, you immediately want to deny access and lock that user out. So these three scenarios have three different user experiences, and how you establish better sense of security is making sure you only ask for additional friction when the need presents. And that's what we will be seeing today in the demonstration as well. And we can actually talk a little bit about the analytics and orchestration that Okta does when a user is logging in to make sure they have an extremely frictionless approach or even a high risk and high friction approach as well. And the last thing I want to talk a little bit about is, like I mentioned earlier, identity is not going to be a silver bullet for cybersecurity and for eliminating cybersecurity vulnerabilities. We need to make sure we integrate with all the applications in the security stack. So what Okta does is Okta picks up risk signals from all these additional applications and third-party vendors and actually uses those to evaluate security policies and make sure your employees get a tailor-made approach. And just to give you an example, you can see one of our third-party partners, CrowdStrike, is being used here. So when a user logs in, Okta picks up the risk level from the CrowdStrike signals. And based on the risk signal, Okta can either allow access to a user or prompt for an MFA factor, depending upon the level of risk, or even deny an access if Okta believes that this specific user is coming from a malicious IP address or trying to do something with malicious intent. And to wrap up the presentation here, what I wanted to talk a little bit about is the offerings that Okta has in the industry today. So we break this down into three logical components. The first part is access management. So the first part would be single sign-on. So when your employees are logging in, they don't want to have 10, 15 user credentials for different applications because that increases the attack vector. So minimizing that to one specific user login, which is brokered through a solution like Okta, is going to be on the access management side. And multi-factor authentication on the other side is where you step up authentication for your users based on the level of risk. And then on the other side, we have identity governance, which is going to talk a little bit about the least privilege and user access. So when an employee comes on board, how do we associate that employee with specific applications instantaneously and immediately remove those applications when the employee leaves so that they don't have any lingering access? All of that comes into the identity governance aspect. And finally, we've got privileged access, which talks a little bit about your privileged users, your admins who have access to your servers and internal infrastructure, and how we can actually protect them. And down below, we've got workflows. Workflows is Okta's no-code, low-code solution that spins across the board here. So it's going to help you automate any business process in your organization. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen for the demonstration now, and we can talk a little bit about what Okta has to offer from the dev side. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and bring up my Okta login screen. So all my applications for doing my job are right behind this login. And when I log in through my Okta credentials, I'm getting access to all the resources that I need to do, I need for doing my job in everyday setting. So as you can see, what I'm doing here is I'm logging in using my Okta tenant, and I have a certificate deployed on my local machine, and I have 2 users already registered with Okta. So I've got 1 certificate on my machine, and I'm logging in from my home network, which is considered secure. And I also have, logging in from a company provided laptop, which is also giving that information through the certificate I have deployed. So as soon as I provide my username and try to log in, you can see that Okta is trying to evaluate the policy. And once it evaluates the policy, it understands that Okta has a thumbprint enabled, and it's stepping me up for authentication and asking me to provide my thumbprint for login. And this user experience is logging me in without any password at this point because it does not want to introduce any additional friction because it is considering that I'm coming in with a low risk login. However, if I wanted to do a similar thing with an incognito browser where I don't have a session already for my Okta tenant, and if I go to my the same tenant that we spoke about earlier and provide my username, Okta is again going to start and reevaluate my policy. And now it picked up the risk signals, and it understood that I'm logging in using an incognito browser and I don't have a session with Okta. So it's going to ask me for my password as the first factor. And once I provide my password, Okta is going to evaluate the security policy, and it would still not like me logging in just with a password. So it's going to step me up for authentication and now ask me for my thumbprint as well. And once I provide my thumbprint, Okta seamlessly logs me in at that point to all the resources that I need for doing my job right here. So what we saw so far is how Okta is actually tailor making the user experience based on the level of risk. And in a way, what we actually saw is if I were to log in from like a network that's not already registered with Okta, I can also be denied access in totality. And I'm going to quickly go on to the admin side and show you how I actually set all of this up. And once I go into the admin screen, Okta is going to segregate the entire security posture based on networks. So you can actually go ahead and establish your IP zones, which could be your office network or your home network, or you can also create dynamic zones for creating a geofence around the security posture. So if I want to do geofencing with an Okta, all I would need to do is just create a zone, and then you can actually create a security policy to make sure you attribute users for being in zone or out of zone. So for example, I don't have any employees coming from China today. So I'm going to say I'm going to create a policy that says China. And all I would need to do is just search for the country China, and all the email, all the network traffic associated with the country China is going to show up right here. And once I create that security posture, now I've already created a geofence around the country China. And if I go back to behavior detection, this is the other parameter that I actually took into consideration when I'm evaluating my security posture. So when I logged in using a browser, which is a regular browser, it logged me in, but then an incognito browser, it immediately stepped me up for authentication. So Okta is constantly looking at the session, the location, IP address, device, and also velocity, which I'd like to call impossible travel. So at any point of time, if a user is logging in from one city and then logged in from a second city, it picks up that as an abnormality and then immediately steps you up for authentication. And in a similar way, if you're logging in every day using your company provided laptop, however, you needed to check your email on your mobile phone, it understands that there is a different device that's coming into picture and it immediately steps you up for authentication. And in a similar way, we can also do geolocation here and pick what locations within the world are going to be in zone versus out of zone. And finally, you can do the same with IP address and also state. And bringing in all these into context is one side of the conversation with policy evaluation. But the other thing that Okta also does is it brings the devices into context as well. As you can see, I've got a couple of devices registered with Okta right here. I've got my iPhone right here and also my company provided laptop. So Okta usually has information about all of these external devices and internal devices. And based on the risk signals that Okta has, you can actually create a security policy. I'm going to go into, show you an example of a security policy now. So within Okta, we have the dashboard that I logged into initially. And if I go in, I've got two different policies set right here for signing on. And I can give you an example of these two policies real quick. So I have a high risk policy that's asking me to log in using two different factors. One is going to be a password and one is going to be my thumbprint that's being provided by Okta Verify. And the other policy that I have in place is I've got any factor here and I can log in using, just my thumbprint or Google Authenticator as well. To give you an example of how to create that, I have a high risk policy here and I'm taking into consideration any user type that's logging into Okta, any group, whether the device is registered or not registered. You can also incorporate device signals from external MDM solutions. So if you have an Intune or if you have a managed engine, you can bring in those risk signals into Okta as well. And based on whether the device is managed by the company or not managed by the company, you can have two different user experiences as well. For today's scenario, I'm just going to say any. And you can also establish the IP zones that we spoke about a little earlier. So in any of the following zones, and I can pick the China zone that I just created. If the user is coming from China, and if the risk level is medium, I'm not going to deny access, but I'm going to allow them. But I'm going to make sure that employee is logging in with two factor types compared to just one password factor or a position factor. So I'm just establishing a better sense of security in this scenario to make sure your employees have the right level of access. And on top of that, I'm going to ask them to be mandating, you have to use a phishing resistant MFA. You have to use a hardware protected MFA factor as well. Phishing resistant would essentially be FIDO compliant, like your thumbprint or a YubiKey or an RSA token at that point. And once you establish all of this, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to ask that employee to log in every 2 hours so that they make sure they say they are the person they say they are. And once you have all of this set up, you have a security posture set in such a way that an employee, if they try to log in from China, Okta is going to make it a little more restrictive for those users to log in and make sure they only use the stronger forms of authentication for the second factor of multi-factor authentication. And on top of all of the risk signals that Okta is bringing to the table, Okta has a different feature, which is called device assurance policy. So if you have a use case for bring your own device within your organization, what Okta can essentially do is kind of set a security posture in place. So for example, if I have my employees using their iPhones for logging into their email, what I could essentially do is I can actually establish a security posture and say, if my employees need to leverage, email access on mobile phone on their personal devices, they need to be on the latest version of the software. You can actually customize the patch of the security patch that is released by iOS. You can also mandate passcode and touch ID and face ID. And top of all of that, I'm also going to make sure that device is not jailbroken. This way, you at least have some sense of security with respect to the device when an employee is using a personal device. If any of these criteria is not met, that specific user would not be able to access Okta at that point. Perfect. The two things that I wanted to show you in today's demonstration was the tailor-made user experience for employees logging on based on the risk signals. And the next thing that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is how we can actually enhance the user onboarding process and offboarding process with respect to Okta's workflows and automating that business process. I'm going to quickly go into the workflows console of Okta. The really good thing about Okta is if you are a customer today of any product within Okta, you automatically get workflows enabled within your organization. We provide free training and office hours to help build this environment for you. But the really cool thing about Okta is all the industry processes that you follow today for user onboarding, offboarding, security, they're all templated out within Okta, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Everything is pre-configured for you. So imagine you have an over deployment of users. When an employee leaves, you still have licenses associated with those employees. How can I suspend all these inactive users? If you're thinking of something like that, all you would need to do is just search for suspend inactive users. So we already have a template because this is one of the popular business processes that companies ask for. And you just go for that. And we give you a detailed description of what this flow is going to do. We give you a video walkthrough of how to set it up and also give you the setup documentation as well. And once I add this template, you already have the framework built out for you. All you would need to do at that point is connect your Okta connection and connect the external applications here. So the first flow is going to list out all the users with the filter of being inactive for the last how many ever days you want to pick. And once you have that established, what you can do is go to the next flow, which is going to be a helper flow at that point. And here you're actually picking the attributes of those applications, and based on conditional logic of who has not accessed Okta in the last 180 days, you immediately suspend that user by creating a if condition right here. And as you can see, all of this is laid out to you in plain English. And most of these cards right here are just drag and drop, and you don't have to, script anything out or, code anything out to create this sense of logic. And this is extremely simple and easy to use and has a very minimal, learning curve as well. And this is an example of a security flow here. One other really popular security flow that we usually talk about, and a lot of customers usually talk to us about, is if I go back to my Okta Workflows engine, imagine there is some suspicious activity happening within the industry, within your company. How do you usually report that to your security team? 9 times out of 10, what happens is when there's a security incident, your security team is notified after the fact. So in order to be proactive, Okta has in place a security flow that's already pre-populated. So there is a flow called suspicious activity reported within Okta. So if I quickly go into the suspicious activity reported, I can quickly drill down into this and try to show you what Okta is doing here. So imagine someone tried to reset their password, reset their MFA, or reset tokens in that front. All you would need to do is just have a suspicious activity reported tab enabled within Okta. So I have it right here. And once you have that enabled, what you can essentially do is, I'm going to quickly go ahead and show it to you here. So I have my report suspicious activity via email right here. And since I have this enabled, if an employee resets their password or changes their MFA token or anything of that sort, and you imagine that's going to be a bad actor, you get an email saying, hey, this is someone tried to just change your password. If this is not you, just hit on suspicious activity. And as soon as the employee hits on suspicious activity, Okta is going to trigger this card right here. It's immediately going to clear the user session if a bad actor is trying to log in. And once you clear the user session, we actually reset the user's password immediately and also place them in a high-risk group so that your security team can constantly monitor that user for the next couple of hours. While we do that, what Okta is also going to do here is it's going to pick up all the information that happened from that specific event from the system log and give you that URL and immediately send that URL out to, create a detailed description of the suspicious events and send that URL out to your cybersecurity team, either in Slack or Teams. So I have it here, send message to channel on Slack. But if you were using something like Teams, what you would need to do is just go here, create a Teams link, and then say send message to send chat or send an information to a specific channel right here. And then once you have your Teams channel created and connected to Okta, all of this is happening instantaneously. So what you're trying to do here is you're trying to be extremely proactive compared to being reactive. So when a cybersecurity incident happens, your security team knows about that ahead of time, and that bad actor is not able to take control of your end user because that user has already cleared the session, the username's changed, the password is changed, and they're placed in a high-risk group as well. And all of this is can be set with an Okta in a couple of minutes. And once you have that, it's free flowing and you don't have to do anything. Okta is constantly picking up the signals in real time. And whenever a cybersecurity issue happens or an incident happens, it immediately runs this workflow and intimates everyone who's responsible for fixing that specific issue. Perfect. The two things that I wanted to show you were with respect to the tailor-made approach of step-up authentication and also automating some of the business processes with respect to cybersecurity. I'm going to open it up for question and answers now and give it back to Tyler. Feel free to come off mute, ask any questions you might have. If there are any follow-ups that I won't be able to answer today, what I could do is pick your email up from here and reach back out to you offline.
Yeah, thanks, Manoj. I was just going to quickly hop in here. This is Chase. I'm the account executive at Okta. I live up in Polk City and cover the state of Iowa for us. And I was just going to touch on one thing as well. Manoj, at the beginning of this call, kind of set the stage for identity as the foundation for zero trust. And then he kind of hopped into showing you that, assessing risk at the login and different layers of authentication at that level. I think we saw things have kind of transitioned over the years from where we, initially it was just MFA, standard MFA was just authenticating anytime. Now we're moving, over the last few years, it's kind of moved to this context-based evaluation where you're bringing in device, IP, location, etc. I think the next wave that you're going to see with that, and something that Okta actually recently announced, was identity threat protection being continuously assessed or continuously assessing that user risk, not just at the initial login, but continually, so to prevent session hijacking. And so one thing that we announced that I think everybody was pretty excited about is called universal logout. So when Manoj talked about tying in with your different partners, CrowdStrike, Zscaler, etc., Okta is going to be able to allow us to pull in insights not only from the Okta platform, but also partners like CrowdStrike, to where if you have a user who clicks on something malicious, has malicious activity on your device, etc., it's going to take insights from both sides and be able to do a universal logout of that user across all their applications. And it sounds like this is the first time this has been something that's been able to be done across the industry. And I think you're going to start seeing that become more of a standard as more and more partners kind of fall into that, because why wouldn't you? If you have a user click on a malicious link and you have the ability to detect that and automatically log them out from their session across all their applications, that obviously, why would you not want to adopt that? So I think that's kind of the direction you're going to see things continue to evolve. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for that, Chase. You pretty much hit the nail on the head with, identity threat protection. Just like Chase mentioned, it's a great opportunity for us to, introduce to the market how user session hijacking can be remediated with Okta. So just like what you saw how a trigger happens when someone clicks a button, but with what Chase mentioned, it's instant because Okta is constantly making a check with all the third-party vendors and partners, like you mentioned, and at any point of time, if there's any malicious intent, immediately Okta is going to, lock your user out of all the, applications and make sure that specific user is locked out. And, the security team is already hopping on to get that specific bad actor out of the system. Perfect. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and then give it back to Tyler.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. The chat is now open. You have the ability to unmute yourself as well. So we'll open the floor now to any questions that folks might have. Feel free if you want to drop them in the chat or just unmute yourself. And we've got some very knowledgeable people on the line, so encourage you to leverage that. Okay, so Manoj, we have a question here. I'm not sure if you can see it. 99.3% of all Iowa businesses are small businesses. Let me see, knowing this, do you have any advice for Iowans small business owners as first steps into adopting identity authentication into their organization?
Absolutely. So one of my suggestions would be to, start with the multi-factor authentication piece, because that's where, you're incorporating some level of cybersecurity into your system. And when someone logs in, you're protecting them across the board with the right level of, security gates. And if you need more information about it, Okta can also help you, with that information and from an education standpoint as well. And Chase can also hop on, like if there are small businesses and, nonprofits, Okta actually takes it up and, helps out and goes into the weeds as well with respect to, helping out the community as well.
The one thing I would say is one of the things that Manoj touched on at the beginning of the presentation is that blend of security with your end user experience. And I know a lot of, I've worked in small business across Iowa and had different identity policies and authentication practices in place. I know one of the things that owners can get frustrated with is having to constantly re-authenticate. The beauty of having context-based authentication is you're not only increasing your cybersecurity for the business, but you're also improving the end user's experience because they're not constantly having to authenticate. And as somebody who's had to deal with that previously, your end users, your employees get that authentication fatigue. So if they're constantly getting requests to authenticate, eventually they're just going to click agree, even though it might not be a legitimate request. And so I think that finding that blend between increasing your cybersecurity, but also making your end users experience around identity more seamless is going to help you, have that conversation with business owners and implementing an identity authentication strategy.
Yep. To work off of what Chase just mentioned, imagine, someone's dropping their kid off to school, or, they're actually filling out a prescription, things of that sort, when you're actually stressed and you have something to do. And at the same point, you constantly get bombarded with MFA notifications because a bad actor is trying to log in. That actually, makes someone accept that. And immediately the bad actor gets the keys to the kingdom, right? To avoid scenarios like that, we have extra security gates in place where if a user's logging in every day from one network, like from Iowa, and now they're logging in from New York, we immediately see that as an abnormality and lock that user. You don't want to get MFA every single login you try to do, but you ideally want to get it when it's the most important. So that's where, context-based MFA would give you a huge leap, with respect to cybersecurity.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously seeing a lot of the ransomware attacks around Iowa. I'm thinking one in particular, a year and a half ago or so, that was a big ransomware attack that resulted from some common passwords shared across about 10 different users. Moving more towards a passwordless authentication can help you with that as well. We've done that as a company at Okta. We're now 100% passwordless. So your end users are going to be less apt to have a password like, spring 2023 or or the name of your company, 123, etc.
Oh,
You can put into place more complex passphrases and kind of as a standard for that push-up authentication. But if you have a passwordless authentication in place, it's going to make your end user experience better, while also, again, not relying on passwords quite as much.
That's really good feedback there. Any other questions? The chat is open. Feel free to drop, or like I said before, if you want to unmute yourself. Zach says thank you. Anybody else have questions for the Okta team while we have them? All right, and we may have some shy people here. Chase and Manoj, can you guys share, if people want to learn more, get in touch with you? I know we'll send out communications after this, but would love contact information, emails. Where's sort of a good first step for them to start if they want to learn more from you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously you can go to our website, okta.com, and find as much information as you want on there. We've kind of focused in today largely on the internal side of things within Okta. We both also acquired Auth0 a few years ago and work heavily in the customer identity space. So you'll be able to take a look at all the information on both sides there on the website. But here locally for Iowa, I'm one of our representatives covering the state and the entire state of Iowa, and I live in Polk City. Happy to grab lunch with anybody, but I can also provide my contact information to Tyler, and I'll post it in here in the chat as well for anybody that wants to reach out my way.
Yep, I'm just pasting my email address as well in the chat, so feel free to reach out, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I'm going to make one last overture. If there are any questions from the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, certainly welcome to do so. Any other last questions? All right. Well, then, hearing none, what I will do is bring this session to an end. Again, thank you very much for the Okta team for helping put this together. I do believe this is a really important and timely session, so we appreciate kind of the peek underneath the hood. Throughout the month of October, we will continue to host these sessions. Be sure to check back at technologyiowa.org under the Cybersecurity Action Month tab. We will host this session later on where you guys can continue to share and review as needed. And of course, if you'd like to get in touch with the Okta folks, their names are in, their information is in the chat, but you can always reach out to TAI and we will make that connection as well. With that, if there are no other questions or information, I will call this session to an end. Thank you again to the team from Okta. Thank you guys all for attending, and we will look forward to seeing you at the next event. Have a good rest of the week, everyone.
Right. Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate it.